Following the collapse of a three-story building under construction at number 4 Agarawu Street, Lagos Island. The incident, which occurred in the afternoon, left the victims trapped beneath the debris until they were pulled out by emergency responders and swiftly taken to the hospital for urgent medical attention. Spokesperson for the Lagos State Police Command, CSP Benjamin Hundeyin, confirmed the development, noting that no fatalities were recorded. He added that emergency personnel had secured the area and that normalcy had since returned to the neighborhood. According to Hundeyin, relevant agencies have been notified and are expected to commence a full investigation into the cause of the structural failure. Sunday's collapse comes on the heels of a similar tragedy in Lekki area of the state, where 30-year-old Cynthia Oguzie lost her life after an overhead tank fell into her apartment. The Lagos State Safety Commission has since vowed to launch a thorough probe into the incident to determine culpability and prevent a reoccurrence. For a while, we've had different measures of building collapses. But in recent times, just last week, a lady lost her life because a water tank collapsed into her apartment, and her brother did say that it is due to substandard materials being used by builders nowadays. And now this building currently on construction has equally collapsed, keeping people trapped, even though two of those trapped have now been brought out. What are your thoughts on this report?
This is something happening for the opting time. And it says a whole lot of things about the Nigerian society. Hardly have history been learnt from history. It's one thing to have historical events happen. It's another thing to learn from those histories. And if there is one thing I have learnt in this country, is that we don't learn from history. And it's simple. The police spokesperson is quick to say normalcy has returned. And every time there's an incident, whether it be a killing incident, an accident, a shooting, whatever, and you say normalcy has returned, I always ask, returned to who? What do you mean normalcy has returned? To the guy who has lost somebody, how did normalcy return? To the person who is still in hospital, how do you mean normalcy has returned? Is it normal for him to be in the hospital? To the society that is daily assuaged with the possibility of the building caving under his head, is what normalcy has returned. People have developed phobia over the years of buildings because building collapse seems to have become the order of the day.
Why is it the order of the day?
It's simple. Because government has failed to do what they should do. You have government, I can tell you for sure, for Lagos State, that there are plethora of agencies that are involved in building projects. There is the last backer, Lagos State Building Control Agency, which has the statutory responsibility of monitoring buildings to ensure that they conform to building. There is, in the first place, before you start a building, there are many processes that should go through. Your building plan need approval, and there are processes to get that approval. There is a material control agency which demands that for material testing, we demand that for the materials, even from your road, should be tested and approved. For example, in Lagos State, I know that at a point, Tiger Road was the approved, I don't know if that has changed, that was the approved road for building. And then there is specific sizes you have to use depending on what you want to build. And these are agencies that their work should be field work, not sitting in the offices. There is, by the provision of their guideline, for every casting you do, a small portion, a cube-like portion should be taken by them, or you take it to them, so as to they curate it, or whatever language they use, to ensure that it meets the standard. If all these things are done, we will have less of this thing. But what you have is that some of these agencies are agencies that only exist in name, and you don't really get them in the field. And when they come to the field, most of the times they come for every other reason except to ensure that the right thing is done.
Why is an agency set up with a plan, and this plan for which it was set up is not being implemented?
monitored and ensure that things are done properly. But the guys who populate the agency do everything but monitoring the building. Even when they come to a building, there is a different purpose. And then the builders also, because they know they can cut corners, they fail to understand that these buildings you are building are real buildings where humans where humans should live, habitate, or even if they don't live in it as a residential quarter, people do business there. For a place you spend 8 hours, for example, 9 to 5, that's more or less where you live. You may not sleep there, but you spend it. When you spend 8 hours, how many hours do you have in a day? 24 hours. That means you spend 1/3 of every day. Yeah, so if you work for 35 years, you have spent 1/3 of your 35 years in that building. Tell me why such shouldn't be taken seriously, knowing too well that if anything goes wrong, it could. And you know the thing, what these guys don't realize is this: some of these buildings, some of these accidents could even house them. The house you fail to check properly today, that you're in position to check, may turn out to be your office tomorrow, may turn out to be your house tomorrow. You recall when a building collapsed at Osborne, the developer was there sometime some 2-3 years back. The developer was in that building, and it was said to be one of that was a record being set at the time. And that building collapsed. The man died. The man wouldn't have thought that his own building would have seen his end. So why I said that to say this, that you are not as it were above. We talk about being above the law, but when we talk about being above the law, we think of written codes. No, there is also the law of nature, which is even more important than the written code.
Law,
So if you are not above the written code, much more the law of nature. So those buildings you didn't properly supervise, the engineer who does the work and didn't do well could be a victim of his own medicine.
No, you've actually, hit the nail on the head with this discourse. When you talk about the fact that it could be anybody, it could be the engineer, it could be their family members, it could be anybody. Moving forward, with this, because it beats me. We discussed about the collapse of somebody just laying in her bed and,
after a hard
day of work,
a tank collapsed.
With all the traffic that goes on in Lagos, someone has come back and she's in the comfort of her home in her bedroom, and a tank from nowhere fell on the girl and killed the young lady. Now, this week, just last weekend...
That's an indication that something proper was not done. First, whoever placed that tank there, did they do a risk analysis of that overhead tank? Did they consider the fact that it may have collapsed? What was the mitigation? Was there a mitigation process to ensure that did not happen? We take life for granted as it were here. And I heard the landlord just say, oh, it's the engineer's fault. Is that all you can offer?
When a job is given and it is not done, and casualties or near casualties happen, who should take the fall for it?
Anybody who is culpable should take the fall for it. If the culpability is on the side of the landlord and the engineers.
Now, when we talk about landlord and engineers, they are directly in tune with the project. I'm talking about who should take the fall for it if someone has a job to inspect buildings and inspect materials.
That's why I say anybody found culpable, whether it be on the government side, if it is discovered that this building coming up should have been supervised by a particular agency, and that agency gave approval with her. Because, for example, before you give approval for a building, at least, like I said, I know very much of Lagos State. There are some things you have to do. There should be a soil test, and you don't just, when you carry out your soil test, it determines the kind of structure. What the soil test says should determine the kind of structure you have to put up there. So if the soil test says your foundation should go, for example, 18 feet down the ground, and you do 16 feet, then the guy who did the soil test would have done his job. You didn't follow, the engineer didn't follow his job. If the soil test suggests that for you to build this house here, the foundation should be pied, and you do some other things because you want to save money. Then the engineer who decided to ignore what the soil test says should go in for it. And then if the owner of the building also knows that the soil test said pi, and he connived with the engineer because they want to save money, they should go in for it. Then the agencies that should have monitored to ensure that the property was done, because I mean, when you give your approval, these are the things you look at. If you have looked at it and turned your eyes the other way, you have been coming there. There is every proof that you know what was happening and you looked away. Right. Then the person should be culpable and held. And until we begin to hold people responsible, we will continue to have, not just in building collapse, in just every sphere of our life. And it's unfortunate that we will keep losing lives. So until we keep holding people, anyone found culpable, that's why for every incident that's happened, there is a need for a thorough investigation. It is not enough to say life normalcy has returned. To who and to what? Normalcy have returned only for it to happen again. When do you say, how do you hurriedly say normalcy has returned? Somebody is grieving, somebody has lost a limb, somebody, let's even maybe say the landlord did the right thing, and you say normalcy have returned. How did normalcy return?
All right. Thank you so much.